Good evening. Happy Tuesday, counselors.
Good evening. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Good
And
evening,
it's
Mr. Nola. Oh, sorry. Oh, sunlight? How's our technology looking? Good. Okay, good. Hey, Mayor.
Hello. Just working on getting everybody pinned on my screen. Mike, are you doing the technology tonight? All right. City Council members, just so you're aware, I believe that Ms. Sprague is planning to call in Elizabeth Sprague, and I am going to allow her to speak as long as I allowed Mr. Potoff to speak, but I will limit the other speakers, if there are any, to 3 minutes as normal. But I've indicated to her that because I gave him 9, I'll give her 9 as well to be equitable and fair. Okay, thank you. Hi, Youth Councilor Nog. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Hope everybody's having a great afternoon.
Good weather for sure. Mr. Nullup, are we ready to go, or are you still holding on the broadcast? Okay. I will call this Tigard City Council and Local Contract Review Board meeting to order. Deputy Recorder Raimundo, roll call, please.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Youth Councilor Nog.
Here.
Councilor Goodhouse.
Here.
Councilor Newton.
Here.
Council President Lube.
Here.
And Councilor Shaw.
Here.
All right, Mr. Nullup, please put the flag up on the screen. I'll ask everyone to mute and participate in the Pledge of Allegiance on your own. All right, thank you. Councilor staff, any non-agenda items?
Nothing from us, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I don't think we have any proclamations or recognitions that I'm aware of. We'll move on to public comment. Anyone that wishes to make public comment may do so by calling in to 503-966-4101. And those with general comments should call in now to get into the queue. I will state public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. So we'll move to follow up to previous public comment. Assistant City Manager Nyland, any follow up?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. At the March 15th Council meeting, we did receive 1 written public comment and 2 callers. The written comment provided thoughts about the charter interpretation and a response was sent. Both callers provided thoughts about a nuisance property. Since the May 15th Council meeting, which feels like a lifetime ago, we have received 14 written comments in support of property on Ann Street, and each comment will receive a receipt of acknowledgement if they haven't already received that. And special call out to Roland and Inira, who provided drawings and sketches with their public comment, which provided a little bit of joy. We also received 2 questions from a constituent. One of the questions was about when council meetings are going to be returning in person or hybrid. And they also were concerned about hybrid meetings really preventing the ability for public comment. And based on what we've seen in the last 3 weeks, we feel as though access to meetings and public comment is well established. So I was not going to do a fun fact tonight, but then I decided we need a little bit of fun. So here we go. April 5th is the 95th day of the year. There are 77 days until summer and 270 days until the end of the year. April 5th marks 2 things that made me laugh. First, today is Read a Roadmap Day. It encourages people to go out on an adventure the old-fashioned way with a paper map. As someone who has no sense of direction and can be IT challenged, I have a fond appreciation of the old school maps. The second, fans of the sci-fi series Star Trek celebrate First Contact Day on April 5th to mark the day in 2016 when humans make their first contact with Vulcans. And I call this out because as we talk more and more about COVID and the safety protocols, the idea of contact makes me a bit nervous, and it seems really foreign, especially as we continue to talk 6 feet social distancing recommendations. So as we embark on adventures and travels, please continue to be safe and stay healthy, and remember to always be kind. That is my report for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Nyland. Let's see, we'll move on to written public comment. I believe we received 14 written public comments since our last meeting. Council, you should have received them starting March 16th, and the last one was received today. Again, there are 14 of them, and I believe every single one of them has to do with the nuisance or response to the nuisance concerns on Ann Street. Council, want to make sure you've seen all of that. All right. I'll also ask callers that if they're going to be testifying to the content of what they've already provided in writing, to try to focus that. We have all already read every single thing that you've submitted, and so you can certainly reiterate it or highlight key points, but I would ask you not to read the same content into the record since we have already read it. With that, let's move to phone-in public comment. Mr. Nolop, do you have a way to put any particular, I would like Elizabeth Sprague, if she's on the line, to be able to speak first. Do you have a way of making that happen? Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can. Is that Elizabeth?
This is Elizabeth.
Hi, it's Mayor Snyder
Hello.
here, and you are with the City Council here. As I indicated in our discussion a couple days ago, I'm going to give you the same amount of time, which is over limit, that more than I have, will give the other speakers. So I wanted you to go first. You're going to have up to 9 minutes, and you may begin.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Mayor and esteemed council members, my name is Elizabeth Sprague, and I reside at 11650 Southwest Ann Street. I want to first thank Mayor Snyder for allowing me the same time to speak as Roger Potoff was allowed at the last meeting. I appreciate your gesture of fairness. You've received several public comments from friends, neighbors, and other community members supporting my family and how we choose to use our property within the current Tigard City codes. I want to be clear in stating that I understand no number of letters or supporters would excuse a code violation, and it shouldn't. I also understand that there is little you can do to settle a longstanding neighbor dispute, and I don't expect you to. The purpose of the letters and my testimony tonight is to make sure you have all the information. Mr. Potoff has spent the last 2 city council meetings talking about our family and property as if we have no regard for Tigard City codes or public safety, as if we hide in our home and neglect our property. His words have been taken at face value, even published in the Tigard Life newspaper, with no attempt by anyone to reach out to us. I hope to show you that we are not unapproachable or intractable. something I've never been called until Mr. Potoff screamed it at me repeatedly in my front yard a few weeks ago. The photos Mr. Potoff sent to the council of our property are surely alarming to view without any context. But when I look at them are memories of Jojo, the pig we fostered from a day old after her mom rejected her, Ember, the goat my kids bottle fed after she was displaced by the devastating fires and evacuations 2 years ago, the garden beds we made out of repurposed commercial ductwork, the many chickens and ducks we've rescued and raised from babies, some off to new homes and some forever here, the gardens we've grown, the projects we've built, the lessons we've learned. We do not have a manicured lawn for a yard. We have a constantly growing and changing little urban homestead that abides by all Tigard City codes per my last email from Code Compliance Officer Ken Ross. Rats can certainly be a public safety issue if left uncontrolled. While I've been known to rescue and find homes for rodents meant as snake food, wild rats are not the same. According to his testimony, Roger is currently working with 2 pest control companies, one being the same one that we use, and the other being another Tigard company who uses a new idea with bait that contains a birth control of sorts. This bait is meant to attract the rats so they consume it, but it does not kill them. Instead, it aims to stop them from reproducing. The entire system is made to appeal to a rat's need for safety and cover so that they continue to visit. It's even set up to have a bird feeder on top with specially baited seed so the birds can drop the seed, attracting more rats to the bait station. While this may help slow the rat population in the long term on a larger scale, Mr. Potoff is essentially baiting rats to his property with food that they like that doesn't kill them. Rats are smart. They'll bring their friends to this constantly available, tasty food source time and time again. When you have a constant food source made specifically to make the rats feel safe and it doesn't kill them, it seems reasonable to assume that you will find many rats in your yard. Chicken coops can attract rats if appropriate steps are not taken. This is why our coop and run are covered on all sides, including the ground, by 1/4-inch hardware cloth. This is why we do not keep food in the coop and instead feed twice per day in an amount our animals can clean up completely within 10 minutes. This is why we limit water sources and keep the coop clean. This is why, in addition to our own traps, we work closely with a pest control company to maintain bait boxes on our property. These bait boxes are designed in a way that makes them safe for our animals as well as non-targeted wildlife. The poison used in them is one that does not cause secondary poisoning, so that if another animal consumes the poisoned rat, it will not suffer any ill side effects. The poison kills the rats within about 24 hours, so they consume the bait, bring their friends, and go home to take a really long nap they won't wake up from. We currently have this pest control company coming out every 2 weeks to review and discuss which bait boxes have been visited so we can narrow down where they're coming from. And spoiler alert, it's not our property or one with chickens. A properly maintained coop will not attract rats any more than a compost bin, a bird feeder, ivy, or a beautiful garden with plenty of ground cover. Rats were in this neighborhood long before us and will always be here, but we can work together to keep the population down. But working together means that Mr. Potoff will need to acknowledge our efforts as well as the things he may be doing to attract rats to his yard. He has been informed on everything we are doing, yet he continues to act like we are doing nothing. We live in a neighborhood that is surrounded by creeks, ponds, and heavily wooded areas. There's abundant wildlife, some cherished and others not so much. Many people in our neighborhood are contracted with a pest control company. I believe with some discussion, we could make it the same one and a coordinated effort. I know most of our neighbors well, and I believe they would be on board with this. Nobody wants rats in their yard. I'm more than happy to head this project, and I would even be willing to work on fundraising solutions to help ease any burden the cost of a contracted service may place on some of our community members. Unfortunately, if the last 8 years has proven anything, it's that Mr. Potoff will never be content with any attempt we make to remedy any of his complaints. When I reached out to Marky and Roger last spring to open communication, they would routinely tell me they loved the animals, the plants, the kids. But hours later, Roger would be taking photos and videos of our property to send in with a new complaint. It's really difficult to accommodate someone who tells you everything is fine to your face and then files complaints to the city, calls the mayor, the city council, and the local newspaper. I'm a reasonable person, easy to talk to if you're not screaming at me. But these dishonest, bullying tactics are just not conducive to a solution. In the days following our latest visit from Code Compliance Officer Ken Ross, our family worked to clean up anything he pointed out as a potential point of conflict with Mr. Potoff and more. Roger took this as a sign he needed to up his game and trespassed on our property in the middle of the night, putting his own baited snap traps directly behind the bait stations located along our back fence. I'm not opposed to him helping the neighbor behind us trap rats, but they have a large lot, just over half an acre, of grass, ivy, wood piles, and heavy vegetation. For him to place his traps within inches of our bait stations that will kill any rat who visits within 24 hours doesn't make much sense unless he needs more photos for his rat album. Mayor Snyder kindly took the time to call me after hours when I'm sure he had much more enjoyable things to do. He brought up mediation. Mr. Potoff has stated in a couple reports that he has offered this, but that statement is untrue. Ken Ross sent me the information on this service during his last email to me. I am more than willing to attend mediation with my neighbors in hopes that we can come to a resolution for whatever is truly bothering Mr. Potoff. I hate wasting your time with the backstory of a neighbor dispute you can't really fix, but I cannot let Mr. Potoff paint this false picture of my family while he tries to gain whatever power he can to continue threatening our way of life and our positive impact on the community. I cannot allow him to use his deceptions about our property as a way to change Tigard's poultry and livestock codes. If codes change, then they change, but it should be based on truth and facts, not someone's personal vendetta. I ask that you seriously reevaluate Mr. Potoff's motives before considering him for any further action in a committee regarding community interests. If you do grant him the right to continue his targeted attack on our family, please allow me the right to defend my family by placing me on the same committee. I truly appreciate your time, Mayor Snyder and council members. I would like to extend an invitation to any of you to come visit our property in person and see for yourselves what it is we do here. I'm pretty sure you have the address.
Thank you, Ms. Sprague. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Nolop, can you please put the next caller through? And yeah.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. My name is Michael M. Sprague. I'm a disabled veteran who lives at 11650 Southwest Ann, excuse me, with my wife for the last 47 years. Our son and daughter-in-law moved there about 13 years ago because my wife had a stroke and I travel a lot for business. I want to explain what we have had to deal with regards to our neighbor Roger Potoff for the last 7-8 years. In 2015, he demanded that I replace my deteriorating fence in place. This was partly due to him placing his yard debris and his heavy canoe against it, which I talked to him about. Roger removed sections of my fence without permission so that we had to put up temporary fencing. Roger gave me a demand letter that I replace the fence with a expensive vertically grained clear cedar fence. I told Roger we would replace the fence, but it's going to be with cyclone to match the other fencing around the property. That's when the problem really started. Roger began filing complaint after complaint with the Tigard compliance and constantly taking videos and pictures of my property, animals, and my grandkids. Taking pictures for code compliance is one thing, but he was out every day videoing and taking pictures of the property. I got to the point that I called my attorney and had him send a cease and desist letter because my grandkids were uncomfortable playing in their own yard. He is accusing us now of causing a rat issue problem on his property. We have proven to the Tigard Code compliance that we are not. We don't want rats on our property. We have kids, we have animals to keep safe. We have our own traps as well as the pest control company regularly. He is working with one neighbor on the issue, but ignoring our efforts and he's continually verbally attacking my daughter-in-law and making my grandkids uncomfortable playing in their own yard by constantly walking the property line taking photos and videos. Why is he speaking at the council meetings as if we are causing the issue, leaving out all the things he knows that we are doing to combat the problem? Why is he leaving out the code compliance report showing that we are not the cause of it? Because Roger has other motives. Roger is has a strong personality, and he yells and blusters, trying to dominate the situation. He creates a hostile atmosphere so others won't work with him. Even though my daughter-in-law stretched out her hand last spring, I'm not finished yet, to
Well, Mr.
Roger
Sprague,
and his wife to take in.
Mr. Sprague, each speaker has 3 minutes.
I only got 2 more lines here, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Roger told my daughter-in-law the next day that he was going to take the opportunity to be a better neighbor. It wasn't a week later that he started his complaints, and he was telling us face to face that he was going to be a better neighbor. Don't worry, everything's going to be just fine. So I hope you take your time. I appreciate your time, and I hope you start to think of what Roger's real motives are. And now my wife has something to say. Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead. They're waiting for you.
Is it my turn?
Yep.
Hi. Hello, Mayor Snyder and council members. My name is Pat Sprague, and I also live at 11650 Southwest Ann Street in Tigard with my husband, my son, daughter-in-law, and our grandkids. My husband and I have lived on this property for 47 years. When we moved in, there were far fewer houses and a lot more farmland and open fields. There are several ponds and creeks in our neighborhood. Any pest control person will tell you that is all you need to keep a rat population happy. With every field that was taken away for a new development to be built, we would see an increase in rats. Their homes were and still are being removed, and they have to go somewhere. We have rescue animals and kids to worry about, so we have always tried to prevent and keep rats away from our property. I once saw a whole swarm of rats across the street, running down the street. My son built the chicken house with special materials to keep rats out. The other night, when my son and daughter saw a man in dark clothing walk quickly along our property line before trespassing over our property onto the property directly behind us at 10 o'clock at night, they went out to find out what was going on and asked this person if they could help them. They realized it was Roger. He got angry with them like he had been caught. Tired of seeing a rise in theft of cars, catalytic converters, fuel, and even a kidnapping. We are always watching out for suspicious activity in our neighborhood, as well as the rest of the neighborhood. You would think a neighbor would react differently than in anger when caught acting so suspiciously. Is he trying to make his rat issue look bigger than it is by trying to trap rats directly behind the bait stations on our property? He certainly isn't trying to work with us. You have all listened to Roger without questioning him for the last several meetings. Now I hope you hear us and realize that even according to the last code compliance report, we are not the cause of this rat issue. Don't just support him in this harassment without hearing from both sides in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nolup, please put the next caller through.
Hello.
Hello, you're on with the Tigard City Council. Please start when you're ready, and you'll have three minutes to testify.
Yes, sir. Well, hello, Mr. Mayor and the rest of the city council there. My name is Levi Cornett. I live across the street from Mike and Elizabeth there. I'm at 11565 Southwest Walnut Street. All I really have to say is I want to be honest and truthful. Is like since we moved in here, it's been about over a year ago, and we are potential buyers in this neighborhood. Is that when we moved in, seeing what they have over there brought joy and happiness into our lives. I mean, my child goes over there and pets the goats. Our children play together. They're good people. Mike has helped me with many things, and I know that they've given out eggs and vegetables to many people throughout the community and whatnot. The Spraggs have always been kind and generous to us and others, giving out, anything and everything that they don't use. Many passerbys stop to pet their goats and chickens who are friendly and quiet. I personally feel blessed to have such kind-hearted, humble neighbors and consider them to be good friends, sir. It's kind of quite hurtful for me and my family to see them under such scrutiny and reading certain things and harsh remarks in the newspapers that I felt were unjust and untrue. My child is over there quite a bit playing himself, and he comes home clean and safe and healthy every single day, sir. Mike has helped me more than I could even possibly say, and Elizabeth and their children are hardworking, good people, and I'm going to keep it short and sweet and just say thank you for your time and listening. But these are good people, and they provide, and they do well, and their children are great people, and I much appreciate your time, and I'd just like to say thank you to Mike and Elizabeth for being my friends and my neighbors, and they always will be my friends because they are those kind of people. And I wish more people understood what kind of people they are, because they're fantastic. And that's what I got to say, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Nullup, please put the next caller through. Mr.
Hello?
Nullup, is there another caller?
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead. You're with the Tigard City Council. You've got 3 minutes to testify, and we look forward to hearing from you. If you could introduce yourself to begin with.
Mr. Mayor and esteemed council members, my name is Michael Sprague, different than the one you just heard from, and I live at 11650 Southwest Ann Street. I'm responding to allegations brought forth by Roger Podhoff and Rich Metzler. I find it appalling that Roger has been allowed to spew his rhetoric to this council, and not only has the information he has given not been questioned, but it's equally appalling, applauded, and publicly endorsed, emboldening him to harass and bully our family even more. This harassment has been an issue for 8 years. 2015, Roger was sent a cease and desist from our attorney in regards to filming, photos, etc. of our family. The city of Tigard prides itself on being a community for families. This is not how it's felt for us during the majority of the last 8 years. It's not felt safe for our family when our neighbors can take photos and videos almost daily of our family in our yard, call in multiple complaints to the city when he has been told we're within code, and scream at us in our own yard. Where's the support for my family? Where's the protection for my family? Mayor Snyder, telling Roger he'd be a good candidate to help enact and fine-tune the city ordinances, as well as publicly judging our family without ever reaching out to hear our side, was a huge slap in the face to our family and our ability to feel safe in this community. Not only has Roger yelled at my wife and me and made my children uncomfortable playing in their own yard, but when he feels it's within his benefit, he'll still pull out his camera and start filming as an intimidation factor. Photos to send to a complaint for a complaint are one thing, but nobody needs daily photos and videos of the same thing for a complaint. He's not doing it just to send evidence to the city. He's intentionally trying to intimidate my family. As for Rich Metzler, worried about hitting a chicken crossing the road, starts kind of like a joke. Yes, occasionally a couple may get over the fence. We take care of it by clipping their flight feathers, which is painless for the birds. The flight feathers do grow back, so sometimes it needs to be repeated. If he's so worried about hitting an animal, slow down. We can easily replace the word chicken with dog, cat, or child. I certainly wouldn't want to hit one of those. The Metzler family allows their dog Murphy to roam their front yard freely. We routinely slow down just in case he comes into the road. As good neighbors, we adjust. We slow down. There are several dogs, cats, and even kids in the neighborhood that occasionally wander into the road. We may have to slow down for an animal. It doesn't happen all the time, and we understand when it does. We don't call into the city council feigning concern for their safety. We've tried to allow Roger his ability to voice his opinion in a constructive way and rewarded him by complying with requests brought to us this way on the same day multiple times. Fortunately, I think I've shown he prefers to do things his own way, and it's not a healthy and productive way. It's in a way that is abusive and is a detriment to my family. We've had to create a safety plan with the Tigard Police Department. We have to look over our shoulders every time we are outside. Now we have to listen to every city council meeting just in case he decides to start another attack. We have to read every newspaper to make sure false information isn't being published from his tirades. As code-abiding Tigard citizens, we shouldn't have to do these things to live. But I need to protect my family. Roger Pothoff is out of control.
Thank you. Mr. Nullup, can you put the next caller in the queue through, please?
Hello?
Hello, you're with the Tigard City Council. Please introduce yourself and you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, my name is Frankie Bocciolieri, and I live about 3 blocks or 4 blocks from the Spragues at 11950 Southwest Catherine Street in Luron Heights. Mayor Snyder and honorable council members, thank you for your time and for allowing me to speak. I have written you a letter about a very special family, specifically about the remarkable woman in that family, Elizabeth Sprague. And as you all know, and has been spoken last week, an article appeared in the Tigard Life where a one-sided story was told against this precious neighbor. Not only do I believe Mr. Pothoff's claims are inaccurate, but I sense he must certainly have a personal grudge against the Spragues to be so disingenuous as to utilize a public forum such as the Tigard City Council to attack this family, and more than just once or twice. Mr. Pothoff is adamant that the Spragues' chickens and ducks are causing a rat infestation. That is an absolute joke. Rats here in Luron Heights? Yes, 1,000 times yes. I have lived here for 23 years and trap and kill dozens of rats, sometimes in just a week or two. We all have rats here. Why? Is it because of Elizabeth's chickens? Is it because of her ducks and goats? 1,000,000 times no. Luron Heights is 1, 2, and 3 blocks from Summer Lake Creek, where hundreds of rats reside and multiply. Most folks here have wood piles and sheds where rats live and multiply. The rats are no more caused by Elizabeth's chickens than the sugar ant infestation we are all currently experiencing is caused by Mr. Pothoff's pantry. For her article, Holly Goodman interviewed Mr. Pothoff and the mayor, and they talked about Elizabeth and her family and her home. That was not unusual, but what I did find unusual and indeed shameful was that neither she nor the mayor had the courtesy or the good manners to call or to speak to Elizabeth before the story was published. I am saddened that a bully can have such a grandiose pulpit in this city, that a bully can bring up his biased, discriminatory story and be given a preferential treatment. Over the past 9 years, I have come to know Elizabeth and her family. They are the most hardworking and compassionate people I have ever known. Elizabeth is a model of kindness, empathy, love, and friendship. She, Mike, and her boys make Luron Heights special. It's the house on the corner with all the plants and animals. What a joy it is. What a delight they are. And Elizabeth is pure gold. I implore you to allow their menagerie to stay. Let them continue to be the joy all neighborhoods need. We are fortunate indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Nullup, can you please put the next caller through, please?
Thank you, Mayor Snyder, council members. Thank you for this opportunity to address the Spragues property. Chickens, goats, and their disgruntled neighbors perpetuating demise with a barrage of erroneous statements. An article in Tigard Life stated Tigard city staffers had received a barrage of nuisance complaints. Barrage, the key word implying an overwhelming number or a massive outpouring of complaints. Yet only 2 people were cited producing this barrage. Think about that at your leisure. How many complaints does it really take to make a barrage? This article mentioned photographs of trapped rats. However, it failed to mention over what periods of time the photographs were taken. Mr. Pothoff is complaining about a Norway rat problem caused by the presence of Sprague's chickens. Mr. Metzler, those whose concerns were, quote, not only the well-being of humans being impacted, but also for the welfare of the animals, unquote. I'll share with you the same points I shared with Mr. Pothoff during his door-to-door canvassing of the neighborhood while soliciting support for the demise of Sprague's chickens. Norway rats live in our area. I have them, my neighbor has them, his neighbor has them. Everybody's got them. No doubt city council members have them going through their backyard. This rat is a worldwide rat. The only place they don't exist is in Antarctica. Surviving prolifically, this promiscuous rat can give birth at 4 months of age, bearing 7 annual litters. She can produce 60 babies a year. Her mating cycle, or estrus, lasts 6 hours, which she can mate with competing males up to 500 times. That's the polygonadorous nature of the Norway rat. Ladies and gentlemen, we all have a rat problem. However, not all of us are as proactive with contracted exterminators for rat control as the Spragues are. Being aware of the responsibility of raising chickens, the Sprague family is proactive in the cleanliness of the coop as well as timely control feedings. Though the yard appears cluttered, it lacks the superfluous food remnants that would attract rats. Furthermore, the boys' chores perpetuate a responsible cleanliness for the area. And I got to add, it's great to see the boys learning about responsible chores and taking care of business. So why have so many chickens? Feeding 5 growing boys, I'm sure you know, can be demanding. And the Sprague self-sufficiency perpetuates the healthy feeding of the family. I really don't think they could survive on just 3 eggs a day. Why Mr. Pontiff is so unhappy to be bullying the Spragues with city nuisance complaints is really, that's another topic for you to think about at your leisure. Yes, people are being impacted by the Spragues animals. Seeing an adult with a youngster outside the fence smiling and enjoying farm life is a positive impact. More than once, I've seen adults and youngsters gathered outside the fence, coaxing the goats for petting. I've seen an escaped chicken slowed down and pulled over while one of the boys escorts it back to the Sprague's yard. The welfare of these animals is of the utmost caliber. Challenging Mr. Metzler's statement, there's only a positive impact for all those who come in contact and enjoy the presence of these well cared for animals and the Sprague family. Ladies and gentlemen of the City Council, Mayor Snyder, Sprague's Corner at Southwest 116th Avenue and Southwest Ann may appear untidy or unkept. However, it is not unclean, nor is it a breeding ground for Norway rats. What they have is a productive urban homestead for self-sufficiency that provides many hours of visual entertainment for passersby and neighbors that appreciate them. Mayor Snyder and City Council members, thank you very much for this time. The Spragues are a wonderful addition to this neighborhood.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Nullup, can you please put the next caller through if there is one? I've lost track. Okay. And I will just clarify very quickly that I don't believe I provided an interview on this topic to Tigard Life. So if there's some sort of, I guess for the council's clarification, if there's some sort of quoting of me, it must be from actual public city council meeting, minor point, but just to make sure everybody's clear on that. Okay, Mr. Null, if there are no other callers. All right, we'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is used for routine items, including minutes and approval of contracts or intergovernmental agreements. Information on each item is available on the city's website in the packet for this meeting. These items may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion. Council members may request that an item be removed by motion for discussion and separate action. Tonight on the consent agenda, we have consideration of a renewal of Microsoft Enterprise licensing. And I believe that that is the only item on the consent agenda. Is there a motion or discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All right, Council President Lube, you want to second that?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any final discussion? All right, City Recorder, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Councilor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Councilor Newton,
Yes.
Council President Lube,
Yes.
and Councilor Shaw.
Yes.
All right, the consent agenda is adopted unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to a total Tyler update. Mr. Nolip, you are giving the staff report on this?
I am, Mr. Mayor. Give me 1 second to get everything situated here. All right, there we are. Hello, everyone.
Good to see you on camera.
Good to be here. All right. 1 second and I'll share my screen. Okay, can you guys all see the presentation? Excellent. All right. So I'm flying a little blind, so feel free to interrupt me verbally. I can't see you guys since I'm hosting the meeting and doing all the presentation talking as well, but we are here to talk about Total Tyler tonight. So good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilors. My name is Mike Nolip. I'm the IT manager here at the City of Tigard. Tonight I'm filling in for Preston Beck, who is our internal Tyler coordinating project manager. Preston is on a well-deserved vacation somewhere in a warm, dry climate, soaking up the sunshine. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide the council with what will become a semi-annual update for this priority project and major investment for the city. This is only an informational update and no action is being requested at this time. You can see the project outline. We'll kind of go into a little bit of the history. We'll talk a little bit about some of the upcoming community benefits. We're going to dive lightly into a Tyler budgeting example because we've got a couple components, what compromises, what makes up the Total Tyler project or program as a whole. We're going to talk about project risks and then where we're at with the project to date. So this is just a little refresher. You've been hearing in some form or another about Tyler or enterprise systems being replaced since 2018. It started with the Public Works Asset Management Program, and it drove from an RFP that we put out there to replace that software. From there, we grew into what we call Total Tyler, which is replacing all of or as many enterprise systems as we can and put them together. This Tyler Total Tyler concept was born, Mr. Mayor, from your recommendations on the city being more data informed in its decision making, and the need to replace the public works system was just the entry into that to see this possible. So with Tyler, we have the ability to put all of our systems and make more data informed decisions across city leadership and all the departments. We've been in front of council many times. I think 7 is about what I count here. It would be the blue lines. That's in front of council or budget committee. And this is the second update of the Total Tyler project. Since the project takes a little bit of time to get off the ground and running, we decided to go about a year. We're hoping to come back and talk to you guys November, December timeframe. Got pushed back to February, and now here we are in April. So just to kind of remind the council a little bit of some of the decisions that have been approved. We started back in fiscal year 20, so quite a few fiscal years ago, where we introduced and approved 2 IT project managers to form our project management office in the IT team. In fiscal year 21, we added 3 more full-time employees to form our enterprise applications team. This enterprise applications team is the team responsible for implementing the technology of Tyler and also maintaining it over the course of its life, however long that will be. In September 2020, Council approved a contract with Tyler Technologies. It was a $6.4 million contract. This included the software licensing, implementation services, data conversion, and any project implementation related expenses. The software as a service or the licensing and hosting is a 10-year component to the project. So you'll see in a couple of slides how that breaks out, but that is a 10-year cost for software as a service in this contract. So in the current fiscal year, we have added 1 IT staff to our enterprise applications team that is specifically dedicated to the building division and its current enterprise system and its transition into Tyler, and then maintaining that piece of technology for the building division in the community development department. There were also 3.5 limited time FTEs that were used to backfill Tyler team members in various departments, and then there was a total of about $383,000 of contract funds that will be used in Public Works and Finance to help backfill their key positions. So that is kind of an overview of what's been approved by council thus far. So when we talk about Total Tyler, we'll dive back a little bit into history. This is the largest IT project Tigard has ever taken on. It's huge. It is building the foundational components of being a data-informed decision-making organization. This is for your benefit as city leaders, it's leadership, it's for the departments, all the way down to the analysts and the people doing the work. Another part of this is the transparency. So with Total Tyler, there is a transparent component, or the public facing, where a lot of our data and services will be available to the public, bringing government that much more available and closer to and at people's fingertips. This project replaces decades old, and I say decades plus because I think one of the youngest systems is about 10 years old at this point. But each of our current enterprise systems are disparate, they're not connected, the data does not talk to each other, and it'll all come under the Tyler ERP single unified platform where data coexists and is accessible from all departments. There includes significant modern enhancements for internal staff and public-facing systems. And I know I say modern, but for me as a Tigard employee, a modern enhancement is an electronic paycheck stub. Currently, unfortunately, we still get those through the paper. But external things that we will see include 311 applications where people can submit non-critical, non-emergency things to the city, and we can respond and track those. Mobile apps that will have kind of a bring the government digitally to you type of a look and feel, and an ability to combine city services into a single transaction. Where right now you can pay your court fine at one building, and then you can walk across to a different building and get your building permit, and then you go back over to the first building and pay your utility bill. That can all be done in one single transaction. So the $6.4 million contract over 10 years. Project implementation costs are approximately $1.6 million. Software as a service cost for the 10 years is about $4.8 million. That's kind of how that breaks out. Teammate resource load, this is on there. This is, we've been talking about how big of a project it is and how many resources it will take in order to implement this project. This will be a reoccurring theme throughout the presentation. We felt it was important to mention here early on. Excuse me, our finite teammate resources and the loads that they have are at or beyond capacity. So while this is not a pretty and flashy project, what we're doing here with the Tyler project is foundational construction where future initiatives and programs will be built from and the services we provide will be utilized. So I think that's a key important, and we'll talk more about resources in a little bit. So background and business case. Decade systems that have extensively been customized. So we have taken computer systems, permitting systems, financial systems, and manipulated them highly to the point right now where we can't even apply security patches or put upgrades to the systems, enhance them for new business needs, or change our business practices. We're kind of locked into what we have because of the way we've done things over the last 10 or so years. This best of breed approach with siloed systems and data, they operate independent of one another, further exasperating any kind of comprehensive way to analyze and present information when you're talking about cross systems. Our current silos provide limited public-facing online capabilities, and our old workflows, many which are still paper-based, need modernization to streamline processing across departments and in conjunction with our patrons to make a cumbersome and lengthy process more streamlined and efficient. So those are some of the things that we're hoping to get out of the Total Tyler project and why we actually entered into it in the first place. So a quick slide on community benefits. We talked a little bit about improving our workflows and processes, streamlining processes. What we're seeing as Tigard has grown throughout the years is what used to be something that you would go to one department now affects multiple departments. We see this all the time where maybe it starts in engineering and ends up in community development, and there's a financial component. And the Tyler system, being in a single ERP, will be able to streamline and make those processes faster and more efficient. Enhancing in-person services will also be capable. We don't want to. We're in the year 2022, but we're not fully getting rid of our in-person services. But also, we're going to introduce things like citizen portals, where we can conduct multiple business operations under one transaction. The My Civic Bundle is a customizable platform to promote civic engagement and public-facing access points for all of our services, resources, and the information. 311, we touched on that a little bit, but reporting non-emergency and following that report of an issue all the way through to its resolution and then being able to report on it. And then reporting in general. Everything in this system goes towards that data-informed initiative and is tracked, and how long it takes, who's touched it, how many times it's touched, how many times it's been reported. All of those types of statistics will be housed in one system and accessible to decision makers, leaders, and the public. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time because in a couple of clicks this will change, but here we are in April of 22. Currently we have 4 phases active. The 5th phase, Intergov, you'll see here in a little bit, has been delayed and pushed down, but as you'll see in the next 6 months, what's projected to be our busiest 6 to 12 months of the Total Tyler project. So the Tyler contract, this is approved in September of 2020, and it was a $6.4 million contract. The components are software as a service, implementation and data conversion services from Tyler, and travel fees were also built into that. Now, we have been in a pandemic practically ever since that was signed, and so we have utilized, or we have actualized savings in the travel, and we've done 100% remote engagement so far. The Tyler contract and the terms of that and where we sit with that is in a green light status, so we're doing very well under what you have given us to work with here a few years ago. So Tyler, breakdown of costs. We talked a little bit about the contract costs and the $6.4 million approval that council gave us authority to. I want to talk a little bit more about what we call soft costs or other costs, and that is the backfill positions, contract and temp positions to come in and do work while teammates focus on that. Salary and benefits of teammates that are focusing and dedicating the majority of their time on the Tyler project. Training space, as you found out, and thank you for approving in our Q2 supplemental the training facility that we're working on getting ready for use. And then all of the other extras, whether it's publications, whether it's training prizes, like, hey, who was the first one, you get a squishy ball because you entered your payroll correctly. So all of those other little project costs add up to, as well as the soft costs. Now what we're finding is the Tyler contract costs and the soft costs are about equal in value. So with that said, the Tyler program over the 10 years is projected to be somewhere in the $12 to $14 million range. And that includes both sides of that equation. So risk management is a part of every small or large project. Every project has some form of risk to it. We've got a very dedicated and detailed way of dealing with risk management, and we meet with Tyler implementation team and our Tigard team every 6 months on every module and update our risk registry. So we assess current risks and adjust for new ones. Project risks and module specific risks. So currently we have 28 identified risks. Many of them are part of resources. Pandemics are another thing that we never thought we would be in when we first started this. Weather and natural events like wildfires, resistance to change, and even changes in council and city leadership is tracked on our risk register. So it's important because we're kind of transitioning into this phase of what are our risks and where are we at with the risks in the project. So our current identified risks, unfortunately, we're in a red light, kind of not even a caution area, but a extreme red type of a situation. So teammate turnover, we are here in the Great Resignation, and we are experiencing teammate turnover. And that turnover is leading to vacancies, and those vacancies are taking an extremely long amount of time to find qualified candidates to fill those positions. We've also been in the pandemic, and there has been a lot of different priorities that have come at Tigard teammates over time to work on benefits for our community during the pandemic. So teammate availability to work on the project has definitely been an issue that we've been dealing with for quite a while. Project scale and resource load, like we said, this is our largest IT project ever. And the resources that it takes is quite high. The terms that we use in our Tyler project is a functional lead, that's the decision maker over a module. That is anywhere from 70 to 90% of that person's time. There's also a subject matter expert, which is up to 50% of that person's time. We'll look at some statistics in a few slides, but when you think about taking 70 or 90% of someone's time and dedicating to the project, that leaves very, very little time for daily operations. We want to thank you for the funding for the training facility. It's still listed on here as an identified risk because it's not completed. We're targeting completion mid-May, but we're still working through the land use process that goes along with bringing in a temporary facility and getting it hooked up and for use. But we are targeting mid-May, and things are looking very positive on that front. So I want to thank Community Development and our building division, Justin and Kevin, for all of their helping us with that. The last one is identified as a risk, but it's a risk that we've really been successful with. So 100% online implementation is a very hard thing to adapt to, but I will tell you that everyone that has been working on this project has done an amazing job at participating remotely in a large-scale implementation project. It's not that we haven't had bumps along the way. We've navigated some different challenges due to being remote. We've been highly successful in overcoming this identified risk. So what are the impacts to some of those risks that are putting us in the red light? Unfortunately, we've had 2 delays. And we can call it a delay, we can call it a schedule extension, we can call it, there's lots of different terms, but really I feel like delay is fair because delay associates with unknown situations that have occurred. So the first one, we had some resource issues and some key vacancies in the utility billing and community development department. These were modules that weren't being actively implemented at the time, so it was a very easy thing just to kind of delay and push that schedule out by 3 months. No financial impacts were associated with that first delay. The second delay has been kind of this ongoing, lingering resource issue in the finance department since May of 2021. People and money are the kingpins or the foundational building blocks of all ERP systems. Every module interacts with HR and financial data. And so we've been struggling a little bit keeping the right amount of dedicated resources on that project. Finance and HCM are very critical key components. Currently, unfortunately, in the finance department, we have 6 vacancies, which is about little over 30% of the department. In another week or so, that will rise to 7. And these are all critical. Well, 5 of the 7 are critical functional lead or subject matter expert roles with the Tyler project. So we're targeting a 6-month adjustment or delay in our schedule, but there is a potential that if the resource part of it can't be figured out, that delay could extend a little bit beyond that 6 months. Let's see here. Okay, so here is our new risk mitigation schedule. You'll see here the first delay for utility billing and Intergov was about a 3-month delay starting in October. And then luckily, this second delay was right when we were going to start the Intergov permitting process, but we went to the steering committee and kind of just said we need to really evaluate this, and the steering committee agreed. So before we kicked off the Intergov platform, we were able to delay all of those resources without any additional costs. Now, we were talking earlier, the financial component and the payroll component or human resources component is the kingpin to the ERP. That is where you see all of these other delays. And so due to these risks and staff turnovers and vacancies, we've had to adjust from going live, this July and targeting January 1st of 23 for our Munis and HR payroll modules. Right behind that would be the the EAM, which is Enterprise Asset Management and Work Order System. And then luckily, we believe that utility billing can stay on track since we did have that initial delay. It actually lines up nicely with a May of 2023 go live date. What you're seeing is we're condensing a lot of go lives kind of back to back to back, so which is a hard thing, but it lands more on us as a project implementation team within IT and that enterprise team that was built versus on the departmental teams spread across all of these modules. The additional impacts to delaying finance and HR is just basically that ripple effect. You can't have a court person process any citations without tying it back to a financial system. We can't issue payroll without having a general ledger. So basically everything just kind of gets pushed down the road a little bit. And again, without proper dedicated resources, this could easily extend the initial delay period, but I'm very confident that we've got a good plan in place to make it happen. So why did we do this? Why didn't we just push forward and get it implemented? And I think this is the key, is that data integrity and process improvement and driving new efficiencies using technology are the true measures of a successful Total Tyler project. It's not just get it done. Our teams have been working incredibly hard towards the success of this project. I just want to put that out there. Everybody is 100% dedicated and doing the absolute best that they can. A lot of times they just don't have the time in the day to do, end of month closing and 3 days worth of Tyler sessions in a week. To date, nearly 15,000 hours of staff time or teammate time has been dedicated to the total Tyler project. That's huge. That's a lot of dedicated teammates, and I will tell you, every single one of those hours has been 100% in on this project. While the teams have not been able to sustain the levels needed for the project, the time spent focused on the items you see here is just incredible. Everybody's in on improving processes. It's not easy to accept change, but we've all, as a team, decided that implementing as-is processes is just not an acceptable answer right now. And then ultimately, getting it right is more critical for the Tyler program's long-term success than just getting it done. We'll talk about some financial impacts. There's 4 areas. The first 2 here you see on the slides. They're associated with the Tyler contract. They are 6 months worth of implementation sessions and 6 months worth of project management costs. Both of these are built into the fiscal year 23 budget that you'll see coming out here, and we'll have a chance to talk about with the participating in the budget committee process. The other 2 are legacy system support costs. So currently we pay for Tyler and for our legacy systems. 12-month extension, because we're not exactly sure if any of our contractors or our current vendors will give us a 6-month extension, is valued at about $330,000. So that just means that we're paying for both Tyler and our legacy systems for an additional year. And then of course the project resources that we've already committed, the limited duration positions, the training facilities, all of those things are included in our operational budgets. And we just don't know what those costs will be. It just depends on the efficiency of getting this project to a close. So a quick summary here. This is a really large number and it's shocking, but there are large costs associated with the project delay and resource issues. We want to make sure that, just to be open and honest, we have contingency built into that $6.4 million contract. And so what you'll see coming before you in a future consent agenda item is probably about $230,000 addition to the Tyler contract. That is not on top of the $6.4 million, but it's built into using the contingency that we initially built into that. We just need to do the contract amendment in order to get those line item details available and ready for use. We'll continue to work, and we have been working ever since, to find efficiencies and ways to reduce project costs. Again, the remote system implementation is a huge cost savings to us. We're also doing a lot of data imports versus data conversions. We've got some fantastically smart database administrators on our team that will be able to realize savings. Instead of converting the data through Tyler, we're able to import it ourselves. So to summarize, the Tyler delay costs are built into the upcoming 23 budget. You will see a contract amendment, but again, it still falls under that original $6.4 million using the contingency that we had built in. Legacy system costs remain under standard operating costs and are included in an annual budgeting process until those systems can be replaced. And then my cheerleading, we can do it. Honestly, it ebbs and flows. Some days you feel like you can and some days you can't. But honestly, we have put together a very good program. We have amazing staff and teammates working with us. We've got very talented Tyler implementation consultants, and we are making adjustments. And a couple of those recent adjustments, since we do have vacancies in the finance department, we're starting to use our business managers. So Joe Barrett and Public Works Business Manager is going to help us with contracts and purchasing. And Lisa Shaw, the Police Department Business Manager, is going to help us with some of the budgeting modules. So we're getting creative and we're utilizing the resources that we have internally here as we go out for those recruitments. Again, it shows here how much time people must spend. And when you look at the finance department, 5 functional leads and 5 SMEs is 50% of the department when they're fully staffed. It says 2 functional lead positions are currently vacant, but we actually will have 3 functional lead departments vacant with another 2 subject matter expert positions in a vacancy role. HR is in the same boat. It's a very small team to keep our daily operations going, but 1 functional lead and 1 subject matter expert is 45% of that department. However hard that sounds, our team is really willing and putting in the time and effort to make this happen. So in summary, we have a considerable workload ahead of us, but it is achievable. We provided you with an update on the Total Tile project and how we've established the project framework, reviewed some of the project components, risk, and emphasized the needs to properly resource this project within the departments for a successful outcome. When completed, the Tyler project will be a great benefit for the Tigard community, offering streamlined and efficient processes and easier access to resources. I'm confident with your support and a commitment from our city leadership, we will get there. So, councilors and Mr. Mayor, I thank you for your time, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Nolop. That was very thorough, and I think I understand how all of the delays or the delay and the resources all match up. So I appreciate you kind of tracking us through that. There may be other questions that other members of the council have, but I certainly appreciate that. Councillor Newton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Nolop. Very thorough. And as somebody who used to work on connecting with citizens, I'm really excited about the 311. You can only track so many Excel spreadsheets to keep track of that. So that'll be great. I guess I would just say that I appreciate the comments that you made about teammate availability and resources. I agree that I think this needs to be a top priority for the community, and I encourage our leadership team and our city manager, if we as a council are asking for something new or a deadline on a project or scheduling, that if it's going to affect those people that are really involved in Tyler, that we think about that. I know that that's probably the case because you talked about that initially, but I'd kind of forgotten, how resource intense it is. And so I don't think that a friendly reminder to us about how deadlines that we set or schedules that we ask the team to meet, if it affects that schedule, it would be good for us to know. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Great, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, IT Manager Nolop. I appreciate the thorough review and content and upbeat report at the end. I'm a little concerned about the upbeat report though on the we can do it, and only because it looks like you're short-staffed and finance is short-staffed, and we've already got a delay hit, which I understand is in the contingency, but how, and I understand the resourcefulness and having the 2 staff assist between Ms. Shaw and I'm sorry, I forgot the other gentleman's name, but I would be remiss if I didn't say I'm very concerned and appreciate the excitement, but a bit concerned about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it. I'm concerned as well. I do know that, as we reorganize, as we've gone through hiring processes and bring people on board, they're going to get immediately thrown in to Total Tyler as those resources become available. But it is probably my #1 concern as well. Will this 6-month delay, push out to 12 months? Luckily, we're kind of forecasting we have to pay 12 months of support to products that we're leaving anyway. So that large chunk wouldn't increase, but there is, if we went further down beyond the 6 months, the implementation time and project management time would increase. I'm hoping, there's a potential that we can realize enough savings to offset that and still stay under that $6.4 million if that was to happen, but we'd have to really crunch some numbers. And I'll say we're working with finance now that Cindy's on board. She's been very helpful in helping us dig through the Tyler finances. We don't have an IT analyst on board, and our senior analyst on the Tyler team has been a vacant position since July. So we've been struggling with giving you guys graphs and all the pretty stuff to see this, but Cindy's really jumping in, and the commitment with Cindy, and then using management partners to come up with some reproducible information that we can give you on the financial status on a more frequent basis. That's coming in our near future. But I agree with you. It's a little scary.
Council President Lube.
Yeah, I just, I'd like to echo a lot of what's been said, but I also really want to thank you and thank the team and the staff for making sure this is done right the first time. Doing implementations, it can be incredibly dangerous just to push it through and hit a timeline just to hit a timeline rather than doing it correctly and making sure everything's all set, especially when we're doing finance. We're looking at my company at doing it, and the thought of like pushing something through just makes me twitch and all like the problems it'll cause in the future. So although it's really unfortunate to hear that we're pushing it out, it is the right call to make sure that it's being done correctly to set us up to be able to do additional modules on top of it. So thank you for playing the long game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's hard conversations to have, especially with the motivated steering committee that we have. But it is the right call. And the fact is that, this train's moving. And once we're done with finance, we're moving on to, 2 years worth of other stuff. So coming back to fix things is literally years away. And that's hit home and really made us focus on doing it right the first time.
There's another point in there, I think, with what Council President Lube said, and I guess I feel like the community and the rest of the council should appreciate this, and I'll just point it out, and that is that we're talking about, and you were describing, transformational change in our work processes and efficiency that is not business as usual with a new system. It is redesigning work processes to be as efficient, as effective as possible during and through this implementation process. And that to me is really important when we talk about, and frankly, when I challenge the entire community, the city and the council to, move into the 21st century, frankly, with some of our business processes and data systems when I first became mayor. So I just want to point that out, that there's more to what's going on than just the implementation of a system.
Thank you. You're 100% correct.
Other comments or questions from the council? Okay. Mr. Nolop, thank you very much. And with that, I think I'm going to hand the meeting over to Council President Lube to facilitate. And I will come back when we are done with the next item on the agenda, which is to discuss charter interpretation.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder. I believe City Manager Reimer is going to introduce us, the next item on the agenda.
Yep. Well, good evening, Council President and councilors. Tonight, the council is being asked to discuss your interpretation of consecutive years, or the charter interpretation, as we refer to. That's in Section 7 of the city's charter. As you know, in the AIS, there's specific questions that have been posed to help guide you through what your interpretation would be. You've also received a couple of briefings on this. The first one was in December of 2021, and then in March we came back with an update by Mr. Wyatt in regards to some of the community and public comments we'd received to that point. We also, through that process, received approximately 100 different respondents to the public comments, and all that is included in your packet as well. The goal of this process is to have your conversation this evening. We have reserved time next week if necessary, though if you're able to provide the direction that we're seeking, we would then draft a resolution that would come back to you on April 19th for your consideration on formally adopting what your interpretation is. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our city attorney, and she's going to provide a little additional information, and then turn it back to Council President Lube.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. So I wanted to give just a quick overview of rules of statutory interpretation. So because your task tonight is essentially that, interpreting the charter's language, I wanted to just kind of give a quick overview of how that's treated in case law. So the city's charter is interpreted the same way as a state statute would be. So when I say statutory interpretation, it's the same for the city's charter. So the way a court would approach this, and you're essentially acting as the court tonight, the first inquiry would be, what is the text and context of the language at issue? Because ultimately your job is to interpret what the intent was by the drafters of the language, and then because this was approved by the voters, also what the voters thought they were voting on. What was the intent of the voters as well as the drafters? So you'll first start with the text and the context. The text is essentially that it's what the language says. So the dictionary definition of the word, the common meaning of the word, what are the words at issue? The context is exactly that, the context of the statute or the charter here. So what are the surrounding terms? What is the purpose of the section that it's in? What are similarly situated sections that may use the same words or may use similar words, making sure that the intent of one section doesn't cause it to conflict with the intent of another section. So looking at how all the pieces fit together. And then also looking at the legislative history. So that includes the previous versions of the charter. So all of this has been provided to council and is available for the public on the city's website. So the previous versions of the charter language itself, and then any legislative history, which would include things like council minutes of the discussions. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Thank you to you both. So at first I want to thank our Tigard community members who've provided input and their thoughts on our charter interpretation. I also want to welcome everyone who's been following along and anyone tuning in today to our discussion. Hello, good evening. Nice to have you. I'd like to thank our Tigard teammates for all the background information that they've been able to compile, including previous council discussions and a history of the elections and appointments by council over the years. I want to emphasize that we're not changing what's written in the Tigard Charter. Changes to the charter can only be done by a successful vote of the Tigard residents. And we're here today because we were asked some questions in the application of the charter as written. And when there's ambiguity in the charter, Oregon law charges the council to clarify that ambiguity. So we're here to discuss that. It's my hope that we treat this discussion and this interpretation much like we do kind of our land use hearings, which is make this a quasi-judicial discussion, whereas the charter is the criteria for the discussion and we are to apply the criteria to the questions at hand. That really helps me in providing context and being able to look at this from a perspective where sort of like the 10,000 square foot view. Our conversation needs to stay focused in the interpretation of the charter. And if there's a deviation from that discussion, I'll ask you to come back to the topic at hand. So before we begin, I also want to point out that we don't have to come to any conclusions today. There's ample time in the next several agendas to have additional discussions if we want to ask for additional information or just to take some time to think about what we've heard. So with all of that, I'd like for us to start with the last question because it feels the most straightforward. And I'll go ahead and read the section of the charter and then ask the question again so we have it for context. So that first section says, the elective officers of the council shall be a mayor and 4 councilors who together shall constitute the city council. At the general election held in 1990 and every 4th year thereafter, the mayor shall be elected for a term of 4 years. No councilor shall serve the city as a councilor for more than 8 consecutive years, nor shall the mayor serve the mayor for more than 8 consecutive years. In no case shall any person serve on the city council for more than 12 consecutive years. These limitations do not apply to the filing of an unexpired term. So the first question at hand is, does that final section apply regardless of whether the unexpired term was filled by election or appointment? In about the 100 people who responded to us, there were 18 who said no and 76 who said yes. So with that, I'd like to open it up. Please go ahead and raise your hand and we can start the discussion from there. Councillor Newton.
Yes, thank you, Council President Lube. I think, and first of all, I too appreciate all the community feedback we got. Since it was a voter-approved charter, I think it's important that we heard from the voters. And those of you in the community that know me know I always want to hear what the community has to say. So I appreciate you all that took the time. I guess on that section, I asked that question, you know, kind of reiterated it the first night, because if you look at the history of how our council and mayor spots have been filled, you know, we've had a lot of folks be appointed and elected to unexpired or, you know, fill terms with time left on them. Unfortunately, we've had the death of 2 mayors, we've had councilors resign, and there's been an assortment of time length of time and how those were filled. And so because it isn't defined in the charter that it says that it's that it matters if they're appointed or elected, and it's happened different ways, it seems to me, and the charter gives the council maximum ability to appoint to vacant positions, and our history demonstrates that it's happened successfully in a variety of ways. My view on that would be that it doesn't matter if, for that last sentence, that it doesn't matter. The limitations do not apply to filling of an unexpired term, whether the person was elected or appointed. So on that question, those would be my comments. Again, based on our history and the flexibility the charter gives the council to fill those vacancies. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Newton. Next, I had Councilor Shaw.
Thank you, Council President Liu, making sure my mic is on. And I too want to thank the community for just the time that they took to respond. Really appreciate the thoughtful comments. Also, I want to recognize that we are in a difficult time. Obviously, the state of the world, we have Russia and the atrocities that are happening with Ukraine. We have COVID, Omicron B2. We have a lot of issues, a lot of hurt that's happening in our community. And so just want to recognize that. And it would be my hope that, and I know we do have 3 council meetings dedicated to this, but that we could perhaps truncate it and get it to one so we can really get back to some of the issues that are impacting our community greatly from a financial and a personal perspective. With regards to the last question, it seems to me that the consecutive years should apply whether the person has been, or the individual has been appointed or has been elected to fill the appointment. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Councilor Goodhouse.
Yes, thank you. I want to echo all the same comments as well. Thank you for the community for all the feedback and the great outpouring of people giving feedback. It's great when we ask for something and we hear from the community, and echo the same comments as Councilor Shaw that hopefully we can resolve this quickly as there's other matters to take care of. I was just going to reiterate from a meeting before that I still think with all these topics that it should be an outside body that works on this. But also to me, with this, with us looking forward and doing a charter review committee, this issue right here doesn't have as much of a time sensitiveness as the consecutive years. So my first preference would be to have the charter review committee decide on this. But if the rest of the councilors decide to move forward on this issue, then I would say I agree with what's been said, is that whether appointed or elected, then that falls under the 12 years.
So to clarify, Councilor Goodhouse, you said appointed or elected falls under the 12 years. So you don't think the line that these limitations do not apply to the filling of an unexpired term, I'm confused as far as exactly what you're saying.
Maybe I misunderstood both Councilor Newton and Shaw. I was that those, whether or not filling of that term, whether it was elected or appointed, would fall under the same guidelines of that falling under the 12 years. I believe that's what they said. If I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong.
Council President Lube, I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I was just looking at the sentence, these limitations do not apply to the filling of an unexpired term. So the question was, for that sentence, unexpired term, does it matter whether they were appointed or elected to that unexpired term? So that's the question I was answering.
Right. I think that the charter is clear that the 12 consecutive years doesn't apply to filling of an unexpired term. I feel like that's pretty clear. And so the question that was brought, that I believe you asked Councilor Goodhouse, was, does it matter if it's filled by election or appointment? That's the question at hand. Does it matter if it's election or appointment in the application of that sentence?
And that's where I go back. I think this, since there's not a time frame on this one, I think that if we're having a charter review committee, I think that the charter review should decide on this one. There's not time sensitivity on this issue.
Well, Councilor Goodhouse, you asked the question and we've been asked to answer it. And so we're trying to answer the question, but I understand that you are saying that it should be continued forward, but I disagree with pushing off the question.
The only question I brought forward was what constitutes 12 consecutive years. The others were brought forward by the council as far as the discussions. So well, my main, as far as the sensitivity.
I apologize.
Where time sensitivity is, I think the only issue that we need to decide right now would be what constitutes 12 consecutive years. And that definition, I think these other matters can go to the charter review committee and have that decided, because there's not any time sensitivity on that matter.
Well, we can certainly ask for clarification, but I looked back in the original email from City Manager Reimer back late last year, and the questions that were brought to the council, as far as the information that was provided to us, is that you asked this question, not that we asked it, but that you asked it of the council to answer. And so, City Manager Reimer, would you be able to provide clarification? Because I think it was in City Manager Update 47, where when it was talking about the charter interpretation being brought to the council, that these are the questions that you asked, that Councilor Goodhouse asked us to answer. And that includes that last question: does the final sentence apply regardless of whether the unexpired term was filled by election or appointment? I copied and pasted it from the email. City Manager Reimer, I'd like to open it up. I see you've popped on.
Yep, absolutely. I'm happy to answer that. So it was November of last year. The exact date I'd have to look up during my weekly update to the council. When it was the first time I shared that Councilor Goodhouse and I had spoke about the questions that are posed to you. My recollection is that our conversation evolved really talking about consecutive years. And then at the same time, we, at least my memory serves, that we did talk, the question was asked if it mattered if the term was filled due to a vacancy, as you're talking about today. So that's my memory, I think, on it. There was the 4 questions, really 3 questions we said, with 1 sub question like you have in front of you today. So I'd be happy to answer any additional questions, or if Councilor Goodhouse has questions for me as well.
I mean, on that, I mean, the main question I brought forward was the 12 consecutive years, and it was either whether it was through City Manager Reimer or City Attorney Rahala or something, saying, well, you know, if we're looking at questions, should we also look at this one as well? And my main part was to look at the 12 consecutive years. So I'm not sure what aspect that came with the other part. I just knew with time sensitivity and whether the ambiguity on the 12 years that we needed to bring that forward. So that's why I'm saying, if we're looking at a lot of the other matters are part of the charter that needs to be revised or looked at, I believe this matter can go to a charter review committee.
Thank you for your input. Does Councilor Newton or Councilor Shaw, do you have any response to Councilor Goodhouse? Councilor Shaw?
Thank you, Council President Lube. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I appreciate going back and wanting to understand, because we're trying to understand what the written word says and the intent. But it seems to me this potentially could be an issue that could be addressed by, and I'm sorry, what we're calling it, a charter review, as opposed to the immediate issue of the first question and possibly the second question with regards to consecutive terms. So I'm willing to strike a neutral balance and see if we can have one go to the charter review, and then we could talk about the consecutive, if that's the will of the council.
Counselor Newton?
Yeah, I guess, in my view, questions that get asked, we should try to answer if we can. I guess if there's some disagreement among us, if this isn't easy for us to come to an agreement on, it maybe makes sense to forward it on. But I didn't see that this one would be that difficult to just answer. So I just thought if it was easy for us to answer and it seemed clear, it didn't seem ambiguous, and it was asked, for me, I'm fine with answering it. If people feel like there's some confusion or some ambiguity, that may make a difference, but it seems pretty clear to me. So others may feel differently. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor Newton. I will say that, this is something that was brought up and we specifically asked the community for interpretation on and their opinion on. And, I bring up that 18 people said no and 76 said yes. That to me is an overwhelming opinion, just a general opinion that it applies to both being elected or appointed. So I don't feel like we necessarily have to push this off to a charter review committee, because I think there's a potential for it to be complete. Like, I think the whole thing needs to be rewritten. I think it's ambiguous, just confusing and unclear, which is why we're here today. But I'd like to answer the question that was asked. I know, Counselor Shaw, you had your hands up. I do see Youth Counselor Nog, and she hasn't spoken yet, so I'd like to defer to her. Okay, sounds good. Youth Counselor Nog?
Okay, I had a really quick question, if that's okay. So I know that the number 12 was brought up for term limits. I was wondering where we got that number, like how it was chosen in the first place, and if there is a conversation around rewriting the city charter, if there would be any conversation around maybe like rethinking how many years somebody could serve in the first place, or if that's something we could have a conversation about at all.
Thank you. No, I think that's a good question. I think Counselor Newton may be able to have the most history who can answer on where the 12 years came from. I can answer as far as if we do a charter, when we do a charter review committee, I think that can definitely be part of the conversation. Just as far as, does that make sense? Should our terms be a different length? I think everything is open for discussion at that point. But Counselor Newton, do you have any history on where that 12 years came from?
Yeah, I've read so much my dates will be muddled, but Youth Counselor Nog, that was approved by the Tigard voters. And so the charter's approved by the voters. And so the combination of 8 and 4 was approved by the Tigard voters. A subsequent charter amendment was provided to the voters asking if they wanted to increase the term limits to 16 for a total of 16 years, and that was voted down. So just in summary, that number came from the voters, was approved by the voters. I think there was a council charter review committee. I get mixed up because I've been involved in so many that put that before the voters, but it's voter approved. And so that's where that number came from. And if we had a charter review committee, I would say anything would be open for discussion. So that's something that could be talked about. We can't do that here, but a charter review committee could. So yeah, good question.
Thank you. Counselor Shaw?
Great, thank you. And I'm happy to go back and it sounds like we may be ready. I'm not sure, Council President Lube, if you want to take a vote or how you want to proceed with the last question and moving forward with it. The reason I brought up we may want to wait, it seemed like there was some contention between who brought it up, how, when, and if there isn't, and given the overwhelming community sort of response to this, I'm happy to go ahead and address it now.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. I think it's, I don't know if we necessarily have to have a vote if there's a general discussion of consensus, because it's going to go back to our city teammates to bring probably a resolution forward at the next meeting. And so I think as long as there's a consensus, we can agree upon that, or maybe do an informal thumbs up, thumbs down, and then we can move on to the next question. Does somebody want to put forward a recommendation that we can sort of informally approve?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my microphone. Bear with me. You know me and technology. I guess I will say I'm looking for concurrence that the last sentence of the first paragraph, these limitations do not apply to the filling of an unexpired term. That sentence applies whether or not the individual is appointed or elected to the unexpired term.
Counselor Shaw, can I get a just a yes or a no if you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. Counselor Goodhouse?
I mean, I can move forward, but I still think that it doesn't need to be answered by us, but I can move forward with that though.
Okay. That's something that I also agree on. And so I think City Manager Reimer, do you feel comfortable that that's direction for the answer to that question?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So the next question for discussion, I think, the next question sort of has a couple of questions after it. And so the next point of discussion I'd like is, what is the meaning of consecutive years? City Manager or City Attorney Rahala has given us has pointed us to the Merriam-Webster definition of consecutive and years. And so sort of the same way we did the last topic, if you want to raise your hands and give based off of the discussion from the city as far as our residents and our community members or anything that you've read so far, happy to start that discussion. Councilor Goodhouse?
Yes, and a correction, unless I read it wrong, but I think City Attorney Rahala mentioned both. It could either be Webster's dictionary or consecutive. Could be, there's more than one definition of what consecutive was. And with me looking at.
Oh, I was going to say, I think she said there was one definition of consecutive, but there's, if you look up year, there's a variety of different definitions under it.
I think originally it was the consecutive year would just be, years in a row. And then she added additional definition of Webster's dictionary, which would be 365 and a half. Just looking at it from, going through the comments and reading from what the citizen said, it's almost, I didn't do the exact numbers, but it seemed to be an overwhelming, 95 to 98% of people saying that a consecutive year was a year back to back, that they didn't see, a couple of days different as far as either resigning or taking a break as counting as a break. So from what I've seen and what I've always thought consecutive would be is in a row, whether or not someone served a month or served 12 months or one day or that. Consecutive is always in a row. You look at a calendar and each year is counting each year in a row. So that would be my definition, and the overwhelming replies what I saw from the public would be the same way.
Can you give me a one sentence on how you would define a consecutive year, just for clarity purposes?
I count consecutive as numerically in order. If you're going from 20 to 2020 to 2032, that's each year's in a row. It's a consecutive year, and to me, a break in those would be a gap in that year.
Well, Councilor Goodhouse, to be clear, we're just talking about what a consecutive year is, and not the next question of does it meet, what is the acceptable break in service? And so I think the first step is we need to define what a consecutive year is. And the reason I'm pushing you to be so specific is that's the reason we're here, is to actually define, so there's no confusion over what exactly it means. Is it 364 and a fourth? Is it a calendar? Is it a calendar? Is it a fiscal? So we need to be very, very specific in what we're talking about so we can understand if we're all on the same page, or if we have conversation topics or want to talk about something, we have clarity. So that's why I'm pushing you for a definition of what a consecutive year is for you.
Yeah, in a row. The calendar year, whether or not, it's in a row. Each year, each calendar counts as a year, whether or not.
So for you, a consecutive year is January 1st through December 31st. That's one consecutive year.
Yeah, it's the year. It's not, it doesn't count as the dates. It's that year. Anything that falls in that year counts as that year.
Okay. Counselor Newton?
Yeah, I am going to throw something out there for folks to throw water on, but because we're talking in that section about terms, which a term is generally from January 1st to December 31st, I'm going to suggest that consecutive years means successive calendar years, just for purposes of y'all to chew on. Might not work, but I'm going to throw it out there.
Thank you. Counselor Shaw? I know you haven't raised your hand, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak if you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's back to back. We overwhelmingly saw the comments say, you know, it's back to back, it's in a row, successive means successive. And to Counselor Newton's term, are you suggesting that for our review, or is that for, I just want to understand the context. Happy to consider. I just want to understand.
Sure. I'm looking at, in that paragraph, we're talking about folks being limited to 12 years. So, and because we're talking about 12 years and there's confusion about the years, it seems like a calendar year might work because our terms are from January 1st to December 31st. So since the section, I'm thinking about the context, which really helped me as I was thinking through all this. In that paragraph, we're talking about, terms and 12 years. And so the terms run from January 1st to December 31st. So I didn't think, naming months or fiscal year or whatever. I just thought successive calendar year is as few words, I'm very wordy, as I could think of. Since we're not adding words to the charter, we're just clarifying by the resolution what we mean. The simpler was better. So that's why I chose successive calendar years. Hope that helped.
Youth Counselor Knott, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Unfortunately, I don't have at the time, but I would like to say that, there was an overwhelming majority going one way. And I think since we did ask a lot of people for their advice, I think if we do contradict aspects of that, it wouldn't look the best for us. So those are just kind of things that I'm thinking about.
No, I appreciate that. And, I think it's difficult because, I have assumptions or beliefs that I feel of, what the intent of the charter is. And when you start to nitpick some of the words and what's in there rather than what you wanted to say, it's been mulling around in my brain for, months, as I'm sure it has been for all of the other counselors too, of working out different scenarios. And so despite what some people say, I think it is a truly challenging question because it's not as clear as we would hope in this circumstance to really look at it objectively and to mull it around. Like I said, once I looked at it like the quasi-judicial, like this is our criteria and this is how we're applying it, I went down just a bunch of different rabbit holes based on definitions. Also knowing intent, but the specific definitions. So it's a challenge for sure. Counselor Shaw?
Thank you, Council President Lube. Yeah, intent is important. We have a lot, as Councilor Newton had said, we have lots of pages that we were given to review that and minutes serve as that almost advice as to what the intent was. The ambiguity is unintended and unfortunate. The spirit of the law is what we're all working towards. And so if successive would mean the same as consecutive and back to back, then I would be fine with calling successive calendar years and thinking in that respect. But I agree that the public was overwhelming in their thoughts, and again, in the spirit of the law, wanting to ensure that we uphold the spirit of term limits being the 12 years, being back-to-back, consecutive, or successive would be my recommendation or intent, read of the intent.
Can I ask City Attorney Rahala what she may think of the interpretation or the verbiage? Is it more clarifying as far as successive calendar years?
I think I understand what council is getting at. Yeah, and I think that is supported by the text. I don't have the right answer as to what exactly was intended. There is no right answer. But yes, I feel confident that this can be a recommendation that we can incorporate into our resolution.
I mean, to be fair, if there was a right answer, I don't think we'd be having this discussion or have reached out so robustly. I like also successive calendar years. I think it's in the spirit and the honor of what they were intending with the charter. And so I'd like to thank Councillor Newton for that perspective. So I know for sure Councillor Newton, Councillor Shaw, and I can go along with that interpretation. Councillor Goodhouse? We haven't heard from you in regards to Councillor Newton's proposal.
Yes.
Okay. City Manager Reimer, do you feel comfortable in that part of the question to have guidance?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we're all on the same page so far, moving in the right direction. So the next part of the question is, is it acceptable to have a break in service to reset the consecutive years calculation? If able to have a break in service, how much of a break is needed? So now that we've defined consecutive years, that's the remaining part of that first question that was posed to us. Councillor Newton, are you searching for your button? Yep. Councillor Newton?
I'm searching for everything tonight. I'm sorry. Well, this is a difficult one because all of this is kind of why we're here, because we've got these two sections of the charter that are written for different purposes. So the first section of the charter makes it really clear, and with the history of the failed ballot measure to try to increase term limits, that voters in Tigard are interested in term limits, and they're interested in 12-year term limits. When you look at the history, though, we have had so many people appointed to fill unfilled terms or unexpired terms due to resignations and, unfortunately, the death of 2 mayors. So we have had the potential in the past, and we have had some folks serve more than 12 years or more than the appropriate 8 years or whatever. For example, Mayor Dirksen. And so, but that first section has the sentences that says the limitations don't apply in that case. The second section, where we talk about you have to resign to run for another seat, so you can't be on the city council and run for mayor or vice versa and resign to you have to resign to run for another seat. You can't keep your seat. We had that happen in the past where Councillor Judy Fessler ran for mayor and she wasn't successful. She resigned her council seat, and so she was replaced by somebody else on the council. So that was also approved by the voters. So it seems clear to me that that was important to folks. I have opinions about how fair that is, similar to what you said, Council President Lube, about all the conflicts. But when you look at the voters' intent in terms of term limits and the fact that the resignation is required, I think the purpose of that section is to require the resignation, not to change the timing of a term. And so I think I have to go back to the original, the term limits, and in terms of intent and context, that seems to really be really important to our voters. I'm rambling a bit here. So I looked at the situation where Nick Wilson, who was a city councilor, he served 4 years. He didn't run for re-election. right after the election or in the spring, one of our counselors resigned and our city council appointed Nick Wilson to that unexpired term. But there was a lot of concern about appointing him, and so there was an election in November of that year. So Councilor Wilson ran for that seat and was then elected. He was appointed in May and elected in November. So I was thinking about if we are going to if we are going to allow a break, it seemed like in that case, if Councilor Wilson hadn't been appointed, he finished his term, he didn't run, and then he ran in November, he would be running for a different seat. He wasn't going to be running for the seat that he left because somebody else had been elected to that seat. So it seems reasonable to me in that case for somebody to be able to run for a different seat. And so that break, if we want to go down that road, that break of a year, I don't think more than a year, I guess I'm going to say, I don't think more than a year is reasonable. So I want to start with that. I don't think more than a year of break is reasonable.
Thank you, Councilor Newton. Councilor Goodhouse?
And I'll just mention again that I think the charter review would be great to answer this question. But if I had to say what I've always kind of thought the intent was that a break between the 12 years would be to the next election cycle. Every 2 years we have elections for seats. So it's one time we have 2 council positions, and then 2 years later it's 2 councilors and a mayor, and it rotates. So to me, the break would be waiting to that next election cycle in 2 years. The only thing is Councilor Newton brought up a point where if you get those little one-off situations, then you have to really kind of customize it to those. But I really think the break should be 2 years. I know that when we first went back in 2016, we were looking at, and we threw the voters the proposal for 16 years for term limits and 2 terms for council and 2 terms for mayor. I know both then Council President Snyder and then myself had said a full term should separate it. I think that the cycle of 2 years should be what should separate it, and wait till the next election cycle should be the time frame for the break.
Thank you. Councilor Shaw?
Yeah, thank you. And again, I want to thank the public for their comments here. It definitely seemed to be overwhelming, either the 2 years or the 4-year, which would be a term. Since I'm relatively new to the council, I appreciate all the history. There's a lot of unfortunate situations that caused us not to be able to follow the charter because of passings and so forth. I would like to be as clear as possible so we can hopefully minimize that for future councils. And so it'd be my recommendation that the break would either be a minimum of 2 years or 4 years. But that would be my recommendation, one of those 2 options.
Thank you. I can see Councilor Newton searching for her button.
God, of all the nights to struggle with technology, sorry. And so I guess I will make the comment, Councilor Shaw, all those situations we were following the charter because all those people then were appointed to unexpired terms. And so that sort of allowed them to, if they were successful in the election, they would get an additional 12 years. So they may have served for 2. I guess the reason with the Councilor Wilson situation that I use that I'm comfortable with is it was a different position. It wasn't him running for the position that he just, if you had lost the election or, he decided not to run and then re-ran for the same position. That's why I'm comfortable with a year, because it was a different council position. So I like, having worked at the city when we went through all this, it just was so important to have, I think it needs to be clear, but to have maximum flexibility. Because when you've got a new city manager, a mayor dies in office, then somebody resigns, just to have maximum flexibility. I think is important. So I would suggest that it be written in a way to say a year, provided it's a new council position. I know City Attorney Rahalas is just like quaking the way I'm saying it, but maybe she can make it sound better. But I think that allows us to have maximum flexibility if needed. Now, if you have an election, you're not necessarily going to have an election the next year. That's not going to happen very often, because that would probably only happen if you're in that position of an unfilled, unexpired term. But I just would really advocate for a year for those very unclear reasons that I just gave.
So Councillor Newton, would you say, and I'm just trying to work out like different possible scenarios. So in the situation for Nick Wilson, and I think, you know, there's been a lot of arguments through a lot of the different minutes to talk about the importance of having some counselor continuity just for process and knowing what's going on. And so in your, well, but I guess just say in the Nick Wilson situation, instead of being appointed, like there was that election in April instead of the appointment, would that change your mind on requiring the year?
Well, then, but because see, if there would have been an election in May, he would have been elected for 2.5 years instead of 2. There wouldn't have been an election in November because he would have been.
Oh, because he only had his 4 years, so he was eligible to run anyway. Okay.
Right. And also, they didn't have time to file for the May election, so they decided to do an appointment and then have the November election. I'm also, so yeah. It may never come up, but having gone through a lot of this stuff, I think in my view, having some flexibility, I think is important. And you may not ever have that situation again, but it just seemed like a year was enough to me.
No, I certainly think it's important. I think throughout the different situations and conversations that I've had, we can't anticipate what's going to happen in the future. And so I think a level of flexibility is important because we can't tease out every possible situation. But I think there also needs to be a reasonable break in service. And so I wonder if sort of combining the ideas, would it be, 365 days? Or the next election cycle, and that election cycle could have been that next election in November, right? I mean, if he would have termed out at 8 years and then there was that position open, does that change your mind on it? I'm trying to tease out these situations.
Well, it was 365 days because he finished one term in December 31st. Wouldn't have been serving had he not been appointed till the next January 1st. So it would have been a calendar year because of the way elections fall. So, and if he would have been earlier, he would have been elected earlier. So, but he wouldn't have been eligible if we required a year break. So if he'd done his time, he'd only been on for 4 years. So maybe I'm going down a rabbit hole, folks. Sorry.
But I mean, this is, death by a million different rabbit holes that we could go down, and it's important to think them through because of the possible scenarios future councils could be in. Councillor Goodhouse?
Oh yeah, and one question I was going to ask, but you answered it kind of, Councillor Newton, was I was going to say with the Nick Wilson situation, if he was still within the realm of being able to run anyways, the break didn't really matter to him if he still had. If he just only had done one term and he still was able to do another term, he still was still within the 2 terms and the 8 years and the 12 years. He still fell within that. So that situation, I don't think it would have mattered what the break was because he still.
You're right. But if he was up against it, then if he had served already 8 years on council, and then I think there needs to be the break. And if it was a different position, I don't know that, and again, I don't know that more than a year is necessary, but.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. If he was in that, I don't think those situations come along very well so long. So I was gonna say that, a 2-year break's a 2-year break. And if it happens where someone, has some remaining time left, then there's that 2-year break that separates it. So, with the way it falls, you may have someone that may not, complete the full time frame. It may have some left over, but it's the 2-year break, as Councilor Shaw said. Majority of people said either 2 or 4 years. No one really said anything less. So we're looking at a 2-year break is, and I think the full year, which puts it, in the election cycles. If we just go off that model, if it happens to be something in the middle and something opens up, then it opens it up to another citizen to run. It doesn't necessarily mean we find a way to kind of pigeonhole it where someone can go back on there. I'm all about institutional knowledge, but we can also be kind of crafting it to make sure that someone can get back on or figure it out. So I think that 2-year break, after you hit your period, whether or not, if you've only done 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that, there's still the 2-year break following those election cycles.
Thank you. To be clear, I mean, when I was reading through the comments, I sort of felt like there was a good amount of people. It didn't feel overwhelmingly that people said 2 years. It actually felt overwhelmingly that people said at least a year. Am I interpreting that incorrectly as far as the break in service?
Well, I think at least a year means you go into 2 years. So at least a year, you go past 1 year, which means you're going into 2 years. So, and I think rather than getting us away from the conversation that got here that stated, what is a year or a calendar year, making it 2 years makes, you don't have to worry about 365 days, or you don't have to figure about the successive years. 2 years follows our cycle, where every 2 years and the even years is when we have the election. So if you're off, then you wait till that next even year cycle to be able to run again if you want to.
Councilor Shaw?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Liu. Yeah, I didn't count the overall, but it was overwhelmingly at least 1 year, and then a number that was at least 1 term, 2 years, 3 years. So I think if we did the numbers, it would certainly add up to more than just 1 year of folks who were speaking about the break. We had some that were 4 years, 1 term, goes back to our trying to figure out what the term means. So again, I think and I hear Councilor Newton's point about flexibility, but I think having the flexibility around an election cycle, which is every 2 years we have an election cycle, I think that would provide for that maximum flexibility, but also we just don't know what the future holds. I mean, we could have another, unfortunately, a Nick Wilson or a passing, hopefully none of that happens, but we just don't know. So I don't think we can account for every what if scenario in our terminology.
Yeah. So
can I ask a question whether that 2-year break in service would apply? And I'm again teasing out scenarios. If in theory Nick Wilson, for instance, had his 8 years of service, or just, we should probably stop picking on poor Nick Wilson.
Yeah.
If a counselor,
and it's going to the past, and it's get confusing for folks who are listening. So yes.
I'm just working out a scenario in which, say for instance, somebody served 2 years and then they served 8 years, and a year later they needed to be appointed to something. Does that break, and then they wanted to run again, does that break in service of the 2 year, just, playing devil's advocate here, does it apply whether you've been appointed to part of an unexpired term?
No, I guess I will say this. I am going to my concerns, and I'm thinking more about the term limits and how that's really important to the voters. I need to take off my having worked for the city for 37 years and really seeing the council needing that flexibility in the situations we found ourselves in. And so what I did see a lot in the comments, and I hope a lot of people now want to run, because I heard a lot of in the comments about people wanting to provide opportunities for new people to be on council. I'd really like to see, diversity and encourage folks of color to run. Anyway, so with that said, I think when I balance, the council does have a lot of flexibility when they are filling vacancies. And so when I balance that with the fact that the community is really interested in term limits, I think that, Yeah, I think I'm okay with the 2 years. I'd like the 1 year, but I think thinking about the term limits that people are interested in, I think that might speak more to the intent. I think it, as long as it was a new position, I would support a year, but I don't think I'm going to get two of you to agree with me. So let's move on.
So does it, from what I'm hearing, it would be 2 years or the next election cycle?
What
It
if
would
the
be
next
from service.
What if the next election cycle is a special election the next year?
Just designate it the
Because
regular
somebody
election cycle.
resigned. Because somebody resigned. So we have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
So the
Designate the
next
2 years.
regular occurring election cycle.
Yeah, that follows the pattern of the current city pattern of even years.
City Manager Reimer, do you feel like that's enough guidance?
Yes, I'll ask City Attorney Rahala to also jump on. I think the last clarification that Council President Lube just said, I captured it as 2 years or the next regular occurring election cycle. That provides clarity that I would need. I see Shelby nodding her head as well. So yes to your question.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It feels like we've answered the questions at hand and given the city teammates enough to be able to come back with us. Do you anticipate coming back next week, or do you want enough time, so 2 weeks from now, to come back with a resolution?
So the city attorney and I spoke about that earlier today in the event that you were able to answer the questions as you have done. We both believe that bringing something forward on the 19th would give us the appropriate amount of time. We've already put out next week's agenda. This way, the resolution will be in the packet, made public for a week or so for all of you to see, as well as the public and community to see. So our preference would be to come back on the 19th as planned.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. We look forward to reading the resolution.
Absolutely.
And with that,
thanks to all of you.
Yeah, with that, I'll hand the meeting back over to Mayor Snyder.
Not so fast. I don't think you guys have resolved the issue in question at hand, so I think the city attorney may need to come back on. But everything I've heard, unless I'm the only one who's obtuse and not getting it, one of the questions on the table is what to do in the situation where someone has served less than 12 years but can't serve a full term. It seems that is also a question that needs to be resolved, unless, again, it's obvious to all of you. You certainly haven't talked about it, but every discussion you've just had talked about serving 12 years, and I just don't think that answers all the questions. So I will go back off for a moment while you guys work through how you are or not going to deal with that, but it seems like unless I'm missing something, it's been missed in the whole setup of this.
City Attorney, I saw you pop back on. So did you want to address that?
Yes, so if you want me to address that, I can. So the staff's perspective was that we were waiting on council to make a decision on these questions first, because depending on the outcome of these questions, that next question may or may not be relevant. In terms of answering that question, so ultimately, council is the decider of qualifications for its members. That is provided in charter as well. In terms of legal precedent, there is one attorney general case that related to Treasurer Ted Wheeler, and in that case, he had filled the remainder of a vacancy. The term limits were 8 years. He had 6 years, and the Attorney General weighed in as to whether he could run for 2 years of a 4-year term. In that case, the Attorney General's opinion was no. He was not eligible because he could not serve the full length of that term. That's the initial legal analysis. That is all that I have done so far. So I will need to do further research and get back to council with a more informed decision. And ultimately, like I said, it is up to council to decide the qualifications of its electors. So that will involve comparing the state constitutional language that the Attorney General reviewed with Tigard's charter language, similarities and differences. And I will get back to council at a later time with that.
City Manager Reimer, I saw you pop on. Is there something you'd like to add?
Oh, I just turned my camera on since there's additional question in case anything else came up.
I do know, because this does have implications for the upcoming election cycle in November. I don't know exactly when it opens. I believe some May. I don't have the the specific date. City Manager or City Attorney Rahala, do you have any idea when you'd be able to bring this back to us for a discussion? Because it feels timely as far as this next election cycle.
Yes, recognizing the timeliness, I can bring it in the next couple weeks.
Okay. Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Lube, and appreciate Mayor Snyder popping back on to ask that very direct question. And it seemed to me that we had answered it by saying that we have successive year terms or success. How did we place? You said something successive, same consecutive row, kind of year back to back. So it seemed to me we've answered it, but maybe I'm obtuse. But if it's successive years and the term requires 4 years and there are just 2 left, I'm not sure how you can serve successive years. But happy to. Perhaps I misunderstood or.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could we wait for, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Councillor Shaw. This is rude of me and I apologize, but could we wait for Attorney Rahala's analysis on this before we talk about it? Because I'd like it in context of the charter changes that we made, and I wasn't prepared to talk in detail about this without some context from the city attorney. So would appreciate it if we could do this. Maybe the 19th when we talk about the resolution would be a good time. So I would appreciate that.
City Attorney Rahala, do you feel like you'd be able to come back with additional information and guidance for us by the 19th?
Yes, I think that's reasonable.
Okay. Councillor Goodhouse, did you have any comments regarding that? Because I agree with Councillor Newton that we should probably not have a discussion until we have additional information.
Well, I mean, I think we can have some discussion. I also think wait, have it to come back. But I also, I mean, whether or not we're deferring to someone else to make it or make the decision or whether to discuss it. But I agree with Councillor Shaw. I thought we already kind of had kind of summarized that and kind of my comment that, you know, if it caps you within that time period, then you're done. Whether or not you have a couple years left or not, you have to qualify for what you're, you know, what's available. And so as what, you know, City Attorney Rahala brought up, you know, you have to be qualified to run for that next amount of period. And if you've already hit that part with successive years, then you're, you know, maybe the way it's written right now, you know, maybe you get right to the 12 or maybe you have left over, but it's not a perfect system. So I thought we already covered that.
She didn't, she said in that one scenario, and she was very cautious to say that she needs to be able to look at more information because the specificity of the case and what they were ruling on, details like that matter. And so I don't want to make assumptions that this is the exact same scenario that it would apply. I'm not saying that it would have a different outcome, but I'm saying that I feel like it would be irresponsible for us to have that discussion without additional context and attorney guidance. So I agree with Councillor Newton in that regard. And so I would say in the default of neither of us like have not a majority one way or another, that it would be the most responsible thing to do to discuss it later when we had additional information and we can talk about it in an educated way.
Well, and I guess that was going to be my follow-up is that, are we going to go off legal recommendation on that? Are we going to discuss it? Are we going to take a look at from what the residents have said?
Well, we haven't asked the Tigard citizens that specific question. It's in the realm of the discussion that we're having, but it's a very different specific question. So, Councillor Shaw, did you have something you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, perhaps even a clarification. So tonight you've asked us to act as a pseudo court body to make the decisions on the three, which we did. Thank you for your leadership on that. And would we be acting in that same capacity on April 19th when City Attorney Rahala brought back the information? So again, it would be up to us as the adjudicating body to make that decision.
Yes, that would be my understanding, much in the same way she's provided us legal guidance on, I forget the exact verbiage, but I would expect the same perspective as far as being able to understand whether this case is directly applicable. Because as she said that, you know, it's like looking at the cover page or the summary, right? That doesn't mean you understand what happened in the book. So, Councilor Goodhouse, do you still have something? Your hand's still up, so I don't know if you still wanted to speak.
And I guess I had another comment on this would be is if we're looking at that scenario that the Attorney Rahala did, I don't know where this also, if this gets into election law. I also don't know if we make this or is it something we defer to Washington County elections or the Secretary of State to rule on elections. I know we do safe harbor when we have ballot measures or ballot titles that we rule on to see what it is. Since this is, you know, a question of not whether you can run for a term or not, I don't know if we also, as another option, decide to have the Secretary of State rule on this.
City Attorney Rahala?
Yeah, so we did reach out to Washington County Elections. They said that Tigard should talk to their city attorney. We then reached out to the Secretary of State's office, and it was their office that pointed us to the Attorney General opinion regarding Treasurer Wheeler. So we have reached out to those sources, and those were the two pieces of guidance that we got.
Thank you for that. So unless there's anything new to discuss, I'm going to say that City Attorney Rahala is going to research the opinion and bring it back to us as a discussion in a quasi judicial manner for us to talk about on the 19th. Does anybody have anything additional that hasn't been addressed so far that they'd like to bring up before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay. Mayor Snyder?
Thank you. All right, we have no non-agenda items. City Manager Reimer, administrative report.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, it is National Library Week, so I want to say to Director Halstead Bernard and the entire library team, the library board, our library patrons and volunteers, happy National Library Week. As you know, prior to the pandemic and now even more importantly during the pandemic, the value of Tigard's library is seen day in and day out, and the efforts of everyone I just mentioned are key to that. The council support, obviously, the team that works day in and day out to serve our community, and our library board that assists in some of the oversight. So just kudos to all of them. On that same note, and this I think really goes to Halstead's leadership, we had 75% of our teammates attend the National Public Library Association conference last week that was held in Portland. So we had the convenience and proximity, but to send that many teammates to an opportunity like that to learn about the best practices, to network with colleagues, it's just really a true testament to her leadership and her desire to grow her team's abilities, skills, and experience. So thank you to all of them. On a non-library note, the proposed budget will be delivered by Friday this week. We'll have a more robust community awareness and called a promotion campaign about the budget and try to get input from others. So please look forward to that heading your way in the next couple of days. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, City Manager Reimer. I don't think we have any further business. Is there a motion for adjournment?
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. City Recorder, please conduct a roll call vote.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Councilor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Councilor Newton,
Yes.
Council President Lube,
Yes.
and Councilor Shaw.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Good night, Tigard.
Good night, Tigard.